April 1942, the sweltering jungles of the Philippines. For centuries, soldiers lived by an ancient code: surrender meant mercy. But on the peninsula of Bataan, 76,000 American and Filipino troops were about to discover a horrifying truth. Their surrender would mark the beginning of one of the darkest chapters in history, ever. For these soldiers, what awaited wasn't freedom. It was a 65-mile march into hell itself, and for many of them, the only way out was death. Picture this: prisoners of war, beaten down, stumbling forward under the sweltering tropical sun. Their bodies were weak, their spirits crushed. Suddenly, from the crowd, a brave Filipino woman steps out holding a cup of water. She hands it to a prisoner. For just a second, hope flickers in his eyes until, bang! A single gunshot rings out. The woman collapses, lifeless. The guards didn't just kill her, they killed the hope she offered. And that's how the Bataan Death March earned its reputation as one of the darkest, cruelest events in human history. But here's the thing, it gets worse. It was April 1942. The Japanese had just captured the Philippines, but their victory came at a cost. Months of intense fighting had left their resources stretched thin. Supplies for prisoners? Forget it. They didn't care. The 76,000 soldiers they captured, American and Filipino alike, were nothing more than a logistical problem to them. The solution? March them 65 miles to a camp in the middle of nowhere. 5 days, no food, no water, just pure, unrelenting heat and cruelty. Now imagine this: you've just survived months of siege. You're malnourished, dehydrated, and sick, and now you're being herded out of Mariveles, barely able to stand. The guards don't care. They crack rifle butts against heads and jab bayonets into ribs to keep everyone moving. The heat is punishing, over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Sweat mixes with grime, lips split open from dehydration, and tauntingly, just feet away, there are crystal-clear streams. And if you try to drink, you're dead. It wasn't just dehydration that killed people. Behind the lines, a group called the Buzzard Squads had one job: kill anyone who couldn't keep up. They followed the column like vultures, bayoneting prisoners who fell. A survivor described it like this: "I saw a man fall. He was bayoneted where he lay. I'll never forget the sound of steel on bone." Some guards found new ways to make the prisoners suffer. Trucks veered into the lines, crushing men too weak to move. Others were ordered to sit in the sun for hours. No shade, no water, until their skin blistered and peeled. And all the while, the column staggered forward. For every mile they marched, the roadside became littered with more bodies. Desperation forced some prisoners to take unimaginable risks. Thirst clawed at their throats, and some were so desperate they drank from puddles teeming with parasites. They knew it could kill them later, but their dry mouths demanded relief now. Others tried to grab food or water tossed to them by sympathetic locals, but the price of that kindness was often death. Here's a story that sticks with me. A starving prisoner spotted a Filipino civilian tossing sugarcane from the sidelines. Desperate, he lunged for it, but before he could even taste it, a guard swung his sword, severing the man's hand. And then, as the man screamed in agony, the guard calmly raised his rifle and pulled the trigger. Just like that, he was gone. Now imagine being one of the other prisoners. You're exhausted, dehydrated, and starving. You just watch someone die for trying to eat. Your entire body aches with every step, and the heat feels like it's cooking you from the inside out. You just watch someone die over a piece of sugarcane. His blood is pooling on the ground in front of you, mixing with the dirt. His scream still echoes in your ears, but the guards are already yelling for the group to move faster. What do? Do you push forward, every step a battle against the limits of your body and mind, or do you decide to collapse to the ground knowing it will mean the end, but at least the suffering will stop? And then came the nights. You'd think they'd show a shred of mercy and let them rest, even for an hour, right? Wrong. The march kept going relentlessly, even though there was nothing but pitch-black darkness around. Prisoners tripped over roots, jagged rocks, and worst of all, the cold, lifeless bodies of those who had collapsed earlier. Every step felt like a trap, every stumble a reminder that you were just one misstep away from being left behind to rot. Dysentery tore through the ranks like a predator, leaving men weak, bleeding, and barely able to walk. But they couldn't stop. It just wasn't an option. "If you stopped, you were killed," one survivor recalled. "If you had malaria, they killed you. If you had to defecate, they killed you." The guards didn't care if your body was failing. They only cared that the march didn't. By the time the prisoners reached San Fernando, many thought the ordeal was over. Wrong again. The survivors were crammed into metal boxcars, 100 men squeezed into spaces meant for 40. The tropical sun turned the cars into ovens. There was no room to sit or even fall if you passed out. If someone had to go to the toilet, a survivor later said, you went right where you were. After hours in those suffocating boxcars, the doors finally opened in Chiapas. Dozens of men had died standing up. Their bodies spilled out when the prisoners were forced to disembark, and yet, the journey wasn't over. There was still one last march, 7 more miles to Camp O'Donnell. For many, those 7 miles were the final stretch they couldn't endure. The roadside was lined with corpses, each marking another life lost to the relentless cruelty of the march. When the survivors finally stumbled into Camp O'Donnell, you'd think the nightmare was over, right? But no. What they walked into wasn't relief. It was an entirely new kind of hell. The camp was overcrowded, disease-ridden, and starved of resources. Dysentery, malaria, and starvation claimed hundreds of lives every day. The living dug mass graves for the dead, too weak to give them proper burials. The numbers tell the story. Of the 76,000 who began the march, only 54,000 survived to reach the camp. Thousands more would die in the weeks that followed. But here's something that might surprise you. Even in this hell, there were moments of humanity. Prisoners shared scraps of food or water. Some risked their own survival to carry fallen comrades. Filipino civilians, despite the risks, continued to smuggle food and supplies into the camp. Hearing about these atrocities, it's easy to think of the Japanese soldiers as pure evil. But here's something most people don't know. Even among the guards, there were whispers of dissent. Some younger, lower-ranking soldiers reportedly turned a blind eye when locals helped the prisoners. Others silently handed over scraps of food. Did it make up for the atrocities? Of course not. It just goes to show that even in the darkest times, there's still a little bit of good that can shine through. When news of the Bataan Death March reached the outside world, it sparked outrage. 4 years later, by 1946, General Masaharu Homma, the man responsible for this atrocity, was put on trial. He was convicted and executed. Justice, some would say. But for the survivors, no punishment could erase what they endured. The last known U.S. survivor of the Bataan Death March, Paul Kircham, passed away in December 2022, just 6 weeks shy of his 103rd birthday. Can you imagine what it must have been like to be him? Carrying the weight of those memories, moments so horrifying they sound like something out of a horror movie, yet knowing they were all too real. What's truly haunting about this story isn't just the suffering, it's the choices people had to make. Imagine standing on that road, watching a man collapse in front of you. You want to help him, but you know if you stop, you'll die too. Or picture being a Filipino civilian, seeing all this, wanting to help so badly, but knowing that it could cost you your life. What would you do? These aren't just historical questions, they're moral ones, and they don't have easy answers. Today, memorials stand in both the Philippines and the U.S., honoring the sacrifice and suffering of those who endured the march. Each year, people retrace the steps of those prisoners, walking in their memory. Every time I hear this story, I can't help but wonder, if I had been there, if I were one of those men, how far could I have made it? Would I have survived? It's a haunting question, but maybe that's the point. As always, if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more dark and mysterious real-life stories just like this one. See you next time in Dark and Strange.